Welcome once more, everybody, and this time we take up the chart of Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein's chart is a fascinating one, and James has so many more points to add, and we have so much to learn. So, over to you, James.
Okay, so when you first look at this horoscope, it's so fascinating. There's so many interesting things, but what will make an astrologer crazy is how badly aspected his Mercury is. And Mercury is the mind and the intellect. So Mercury, and it rules the first house, which is his ability to have confidence and fame and recognition. He gets fame from his 10th house, not from the first. And if you look at his appearance, he never cared about his appearance. It's a first house matter. So, like when you're studying astrology, this is very confusing because you wonder, how did this man become so famous? How is he so intelligent? Mercury is fallen, first of all. It's in Pisces. It's in the 11th degree of Pisces. That's 4 degrees away from the worst point of fall. So this is a rough Mercury, and and Mercury is 2 degrees away from, 1 degree away in a few minutes, 1 degree away from Saturn. Okay? So when he was young, the teachers said he was slow and dim-witted.
Yes.
I just read this today. I knew his background because I've done his chart before, but today I saw on Wikipedia, they said he was slow and dim-witted. Friends of the family said he'll never get anywhere. He can't remember anything. And that's true about his childhood. But one thing about the Mercury-Saturn, just a regular Mercury-Saturn, not his. His is fallen and conjunct. But any Mercury conjunct Saturn, close, the child will be slow in thinking in the early years, and they will notice it. They will see that they're behind everybody else. And a lot of those people, I would say most, feel very shy about it because they realize they're slower than everybody else. They spend the rest of their life becoming smarter because of that initial, shame or lack of confidence.
Would it
So
give them a complex?
It gives them a complex. But Saturn, one of the most difficult things for me in astrology is that I would see a planet next to Saturn, and first and foremost, I would say that planet is harmed. Mars conjunct Saturn. Saturn's going to harm that Mars, and the person can't be aggressive. Well, I have a brother with Mars 2 or 3 degrees away from Saturn. He's the most aggressive person. He was in sports. I mean, his Mars was off the charts, and yet Mars was conjunct Saturn. So sometimes you're going to find, I would always initially say that a planet next to Saturn is in deep trouble. But many times you will find a planet conjunct Saturn becoming very strong because Saturn also can give it the discipline, the ability to focus on it. I mean, I wouldn't go overboard and tell everybody, oh, how nice, you have a planet conjunct Saturn. Because first of all, it's going to have problems. But even if you take my religion and philosophy, my Jupiter is aspected to the degree by Saturn. I had no luck, the Jupiter's not good, troubles with gurus, but at the same time, Jupiter is religion and philosophy, and I've gone very deep into that subject because of Saturn. So you have to, Saturn aspects are really complex. So he had all of those restrictions. He didn't care about his appearance. He never looked very good. He never had any confidence or desire for fame. In fact, when he was very famous, he came to America, and I don't know, they had a ticker tape parade or something, and he was with Charlie Chaplin, and the crowds are out, and Einstein turned to Chaplin. He said, what does this mean? And Chaplin said, nothing, absolutely nothing, which is very interesting, because particularly for Einstein, it would mean absolutely nothing because there's no desire for that from the
Right.
first house.
Right.
Now, the eighth, so as I said in my previous lecture about scientists, in the Hindu system, you're going to be looking for Rahu to be strong for science. In the Western system, it's Uranus, and both Einstein and Fleming had Uranus in the third house of the Western, of both charts, Hindu and Western. But in the Western chart, the third house is the mind. Uranus makes the person completely, beyond the normal thinking, very, very outside the box.
Okay.
Very interesting also, Einstein said, well, let me say this first. Mercury in Pisces is massive confusion. If you have clients with Mercury in Pisces, you're going to find them, they get confused, they don't remember things. That's Mercury in Pisces. It's confusion. Now, he's got a lot of really good stuff. His intellect from the fifth house is massively strong, his thinking. But the thing that he said about why he could make discoveries was that he said, I could make these discoveries because I was always comfortable with confusion. Most people, when they're confused, they run away. They say, I'm confused, and they resist it and they run away. He was born confused. He was born not being able to remember to bring his paperwork to school. He couldn't remember anything. So that was just the way he was. Now, I see
You
this
know what,
chart.
James? He was born with a big head. He was born with a bigger head.
Huh, interesting. So the two things that stand out to me the most about this chart, aside from that Mercury, which is just devastated, what stands out the most is the eighth house, the power of the eighth house. Exalted Mars in the eighth, that alone, and Mars is where you're assertive and aggressive. So he was going to go into either the psychic or metaphysical side or the research side. And then Rahu in the eighth, you're craving metaphysical energy. Metaphysical means going beyond, it doesn't have to mean astrology and psychic. It means finding out what's really causing things to happen. Astrologers get confused with spiritual houses. You have to be very specific. The 12th house is moksha, enlightenment. The 9th house is religion and philosophy, and the 8th house is underneath the surface. What's making this happen? So the Rahu Mars is just super strong. The other thing that is the most significant to me in the chart is Venus. Venus is in the 25th degree of Pisces. So it's 2 degrees away from its highest point. So we can discount the fact that it's near Saturn. It's 12 degrees away from Saturn, 14 degrees away from fallen Mercury. So even though those malefics are there, and it's even aspected by Ketu, even with all those things, that Venus is highly, highly, highly exalted. Same thing when a planet's stationary, almost nothing can harm it. I mean, it harms it, but it can't take the power away. So here's the thing. Einstein played the violin. He fell in love with the violin. And he said if he was not a scientist, he would have been a musician. He said that, he actually said, according to what I read, he said, I think about music all the time. I dream in musical terms. I dream in music. And he said, I see my life in terms of music. Okay, so now this is something, I think it was some other, I can't remember if it was the interviews with you or someone else, but I mentioned that Venus is mathematics. And some people made comments, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Venus is math and Venus is music. It's both. And in fact, if you if you take musicians and they're focusing on music, they get better in math. If you take mathematicians and they focus on that, they get better in music because it rules both. So the Venus makes him a humanitarian. Venus, when it's angular, Jupiter too, but Venus makes a person kind-hearted. They want to help people. The Venus is very, very strong, and Venus is ruling the fifth house, the house of the mind. So this, in my opinion, is where the intelligence comes in. The exalted
And you know
Venus.
what, James? He told Madame Curie, Marie Curie, when she was being shunned by the French Society of
Yeah,
Scientists, he told her that you don't bother about those people at all. Go about doing your work and you will be just fine. And
yeah,
he lent such a lot of support to people he felt and organizations that he felt like for the blacks in America and so many people around the
yes,
world that
yes,
that was he was also known for these activities. So you say that Venus exalted and he has a kind heart.
yeah,
So yes, he
very
broke
kind heart.
stereotypes just to make people comfortable.
Yep. And also, Jupiter is aspecting the fifth house as well.
Yes.
Okay. So Jupiter aspects the fifth house and the exalted Venus. And of course, Venus is in the career house exalted. So the Venus rules the fifth house, which is Purva Punya. So the Purva Punya is connected to fame.
Right.
That's where that's connected. Now, the memory is Mercury is actually not the memory. Mercury is the mind, and that's making him confused. But the memory is the second house and the moon.
Hmm.
Mars's aspect on that second house is not good. It's not helping. So he was actually and the second house is your schooling, not the higher knowledge, not the college, but the education. So they called him dim-witted and slow, and he so hated memorization. He said this is useless memorization. And so he didn't care about that. He was bored silly. And finally they kicked him out. They said you have to take your son out of our school because he's a bad influence. Because he is so doesn't care about this knowledge. We need to get him out of the classes. So they did. So that's the second house ruler is fallen. Mars aspects its fallen sign, the second house. Ketu, I don't know what Ketu is doing. Ketu is not helping, that's for sure. Family life would not be helped by this. That Ketu in the second house,
True.
aspected by Mars, aspecting Cancer, second house ruler Moon. So you have to figure in on that when it comes to married life. So that means the family life is disturbed growing up. And then even in married life, that's problems. That's going to be, and it's Mars, so it's fighting, friction.
Right.
The
He did have
Jupiter,
problems. He divorced his first wife to
yeah,
marry his cousin,
yeah.
and she
And he
died
had,
early. She died early.
but you know what's interesting? He did have all these problems in married life, but very, very interesting, very passionate about love. You know, he was married, but he loved someone else, and he would write these love letters. His Venus was very deep. So even, even with those family life problems, because Venus is so deep, his passions were very strong. And even with the violin, he played with some big orchestra group somewhere, and they
Yes.
were stunned. They were stunned. They said, we were surprised at his understanding and his tone. And, that's the Venus. I mean, to me, the whole chart is more about Venus and the eighth house than anything.
Okay. So
But
in Alexander Fleming's chart, it was more about Saturn and the eighth house, and here it's more about Venus in the eighth house.
well, the Saturn in Fleming's chart was a problem. That was a problem that it was about. But yeah, I found that very fascinating. Yeah. The Jupiter in the ninth house, this was a religious man. Not that he didn't believe in a personal God running things, but he was deeply spiritual in faith. And faith, what he said was the universe does not play, God does not play dice with the universe or something like that. Meaning there's a order to everything.
You're
Not
right.
a traditional religious person, but a truly religious person.
Right.
That's the Jupiter in the ninth house. Now, the partner could be from a foreign country because
Yeah.
the seventh house ruler is in the ninth house.
Right.
or the partner could be religious or philosophical or spiritual, those kinds of things. So
So, what about the sun, the third house ruler, and the placement of Uranus, the one who is the dispositor of Uranus, being in the 10th house? And sun here is Digbali, so that sun, does it lend him a lot of credibility as in the religion?
what are you asking about? The sun and the third house?
Yes, the sun as the ruler of the third house, where Uranus is placed, being there in the 10th house of profession. So, does
Well,
that?
first of all, the third house is very strong because Jupiter is aspecting the third house. So that's good for the arts. But it
Okay,
also means that when he puts his attention somewhere, he can succeed. The
right,
ability to focus and get things done. And
right,
Jupiter's aspecting. That's good for the arts. The fact that the ruler of the third house is in the 10th house is helping with, if he wants to do something artistic in the career, it also is a placement for leadership. But when I look at that sun, I have to say it's a 9th house sun and a 10th house sun because it's in the second degree, 1 degree,
of
20 minutes
Pisces.
of Pisces, and the ascendant is 19 degrees. So, yes, it's in the 10th house, giving leadership, giving power. It also means that wherever he places his focus and his attention, it'll go into the career, third house ruler in the 10th.
Yes.
But it's also a 9th house. So, with the Jupiter in the 9th house and the Sun in the 9th house and the 9th house ruler, you also have the 9th house ruler and 10th house ruler exchanging signs, Parivartana Yoga, mutual
Yes.
reception. His career, more than other scientists, I'm not a science person, I'm really not. But every time I've read about this guy, my whole life, I've always seen him as a religious scientist, not traditional religion, but somebody who is looking at not just the science, like, finding penicillin and fixing and doing research, but somebody who's looking at life in
At a
very,
bigger
very,
picture.
very bigger picture. That's the ruler of 9 and 10 exchanging signs. It's, the sun in the 9th
I
house.
know
I
what you
mean,
mean because you also said that the more I do research, the more I discover, I find myself being closer to God. So I know what you.
exactly, exactly, exactly. Um, let's see.
And the debilitated moon in the sixth house. So how would we relate to the debilitated moon in the sixth house?
Well, um, he might have trouble. The thing is, it's a very mixed sixth house. Okay, the sixth house is very, very strong because of Mars.
Mm-hmm.
Mars is exalted. Now, this is a case. Lots of people think, oh, Mars is in the 8th; it must be destroyed. Mars is in the 8th, exalted. Okay, so that's very powerful. Also, Mars is 5 degrees away from Rahu. When I have done charts with people with Mars Rahu conjunctions, they are very sexually virile. They're very assertive, aggressive. I'll tell you straight out, I've known people, I've heard women say, oh, this guy has Mars Rahu conjunct. They can have sex for hours and hours. That's Mars Rahu. It's a very strong Mars, very assertive, very, so it's going toward that. So the sixth house is mixed. First of all, we know that he's going to be very interested in health or healing or in detail work and picking things apart, perfectionism. That's the moon. There could be sensitivities on the stomach. If it
Okay.
was a woman, I'd say you have to watch the breast, the menstrual cycle, the stomach, like that. But for him, it would be the stomach, could be sensitivity. Um,
He was also quite suffering from a large number of diseases for more than half his life.
pardon me? He had a lot of
He wa-
diseases.
yes, for more than half of his life, he had to endure, he had to take a lot of medicines. For more than half, he had a lot of
So,
medicinal
so
issues.
yeah, so the problems are more from Mercury and secondarily from Moon. even though the moon is the one that's in the house of health. So we know there's going to be problems. But the Mercury means that his nervous system was not working properly.
Yes.
Nervous system, lungs, and intestines not working properly. So when you see charts like this, it's kind of like you have to put them together. I see a lot of people where Mercury and Jupiter are afflicted, and the illnesses they have are so bizarre and so weird, and the doctors can't find out what they are, because Jupiter is the liver and it causes allergies. I say to people, do you have allergies? No. And then they tell me about these weird problems they have. It's because the liver is a problem, and then Mercury. But in this case, it's Mercury. So the lungs, intestines, nervous system are a problem. The mother, I think, probably had maybe had physical weaknesses, because Mercury is the karaka of the mother. Mercury rules the fourth house, and then you've got the moon. So, there may have been, he may have gotten some of this from the mother.
And he had to be pulled out by a forceps. His head had to be pulled out by a forceps. He was a forceps delivery. So, and back then in the 1879, so you never know what went in the delivery room.
Yeah.
He said that he was born with a big forehead. His mother did have a problem during birth, and he had to be pulled with the forceps. And we know many a times a forceps delivery can cause damage to the head.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And the nervous system, and he did suffer from gastric issues of the stomach and the nerves. I read about his illness on a different aspect, and then I did find out that he did have a lot of issues for more than half his life.
But you see, this is interesting, because Jupiter also aspects the ascendant. Thank God. Without that, but the length of life should be long because of the exalted Mars. I don't know how old he was, but he shouldn't die early from those illnesses, because the eighth house has a lot of strength. So there are people that have lots of illnesses, but they still live long. That's related to the eighth house.
I think it was 78 or 79 when he passed away.
Back then, that was long. Okay. Back then, that was long. Now it's, even now, I think the average for a man is probably 75. But back then, the average age for a man was probably 70. He lived, longer than most. Put it that way. So.
And finally, we come to the Ketu. You have already said. So this Mars Rahu conjunction, people say in the eighth house also got him to make that nuclear weapon, which is now a threat to the entire world, and he helped to develop that nuclear weapon. So how far can we go and say that this conjunction really did help him?
Well, I wouldn't agree with that. I wouldn't agree with that statement. Why? Pick out 10 charts with exalted Mars conjunct Rahu in the eighth house. If you can find that 6 or 7 of those people are involved in guns and warfare, then I'll agree with it. Otherwise, I just say that's after the fact. They're throwing it in after the fact. But it's possible. I've never done a study of it. But like I say, find 10 or 15 charts with Mars Rahu in the eighth and see if they're involved in warfare.
Okay.
I don't. To me, the Mars Rahu is more involved in the metaphysics and the longevity. That's how I would see it. It is a strong Mars, and Mars is, warfare. So, you could say that, but I don't know. I mean, the Mars could work for sports. In this case, he was helping to save the world. If Germany had gotten the bomb first,
Yes, he was. So this is again a very fascinating chart that we've seen, and we are not going to just let it go only with the scientists. Like, we come across every new point with you, James. Anything more that you would like to talk about? Like, now we have Saturn and Sun conjunct coming up in on the 16th. The Saturn and Sun are going to get conjunct in the ninth house of the natural zodiac. So generally, it's not supposed to be a very nice and happy pair together.
Yeah, the thing is, I find mundane astrology very difficult to be accurate with it. I mean, I can tell you that every time that there's a Moon Saturn conjunction, the day is terrible. And I say, why is it so bad today? Why do I feel so bad? And I go and I look at the planets, and there's Saturn with the Moon. So I know it works, but I don't have too much to say about that mundane. I don't know.
Okay.
I have
So
to leave that to somebody else. My teachers never really talked very much about that kind of astrology, but that's a great field to do if you can find somebody really good. I went to a friend's house, and they were showing this man who, it's called deconstructing the Beatles, and he would spend an hour talking about each of their albums, and it was really fascinating. And I was mentioning to these people that the Beatles came about during the Pluto Uranus conjunction. Pluto Uranus was the 60s. Okay. I think it was 1966 where Pluto conjuncted, then backed up, hit 3 times. But even though that was 66, I believe it was 66, I'm 90% sure, but it was mid-60s. But even though it hit at that point, it had to start getting closer. It took 2-3 years, slowly. Then it hits. Then it takes 3 or 4 years more to leave, right?
Right.
So that was responsible for all the United States assassinations, the revolutions, the complete changeover in the world. It was just radical. But I've always thought of the Beatles, out of all the groups, it was a British invasion that came along. There were lots of groups that were popular, lots of them at the same time. But the Beatles were fascinating because they embodied Pluto Uranus more than anybody else. Uranus is considered the higher octave of Mercury.
Okay.
Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. And Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. You look at the Beatles songs, they got 250, 300 songs. You can't dance to maybe more than 10 of them. They're not dancing songs. You can dance to the Stones. The Beatles was lyrics. It was all lyrics. It was nice music, but it was lyrics. Okay. That's Mercury, which is Pluto Mercury. But what's really fascinating is there was a show about fame that was given by an Australian. I saw this 10, 20 years ago. And he said that when somebody gets massive fame where the whole world takes notice, it lasts for 3 years. And then they go away. In the Beatles' case, they came out with these very simple rock songs from 64 to 63, 64 to 66, 67. Then they took drugs and they completely changed, became completely more sophisticated, completely different.
Yes.
So they had two 3-year periods of fame, all of which encompassed the Pluto Uranus conjunction.
Yes.
3-4 years to finally conjunct, 3-4 years to leave. Yeah, but here's the interesting part. The Rolling Stones and the Who and all the other ones, they didn't break up. Most of them didn't break up. They've been playing music for 30, 40 years. The Beatles, when Pluto Uranus ended, we're done. So to me, they were being used by Pluto Uranus, and anything they touched was like the Midas touch, I think, because of the Pluto. I think Pluto Uranus was
the reason behind it all.
It just, they were represented by that. Anyway.
There's so much more that we can still learn from James. Please do write in the topics that you would want to learn about, and we will definitely ask him to teach us on it. So James, thank you so very much for gracing our channel and teaching us so many new things. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, James.